Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We'd like to welcome you aboard with those of you that are with us with Zoom and Facebook Live. Our event tonight is called A View from the Sky, Our Impact on Earth. This is the beginning of April, and of course, April has Earth Day, which is now becoming Earth Month. There are many, many events by many organizations across the Space Coast that are going to be talking about celebration of our environment and sustainability. And our opportunity tonight is to talk about something that's rather unique in the Space Coast. And that is, this is one of the few places on Earth where people can launch to view our planet from space. It is very interesting to talk to an astronaut, talk to people that have had the pleasure of going into space. And they'll all tell you the same thing, and that is that they didn't appreciate what we got until they left the Earth. They don't appreciate the Earth until they leave it. Like so many of us, you don't appreciate your hometown until you leave it and you come back. Well, looking down on Earth from above gives us a different perspective, and it gives us an opportunity to see the impact that humans are having. Right now, we are experiencing what some folks refer to as the sixth Great Extinction. It is the Anthropocene, I'm probably saying that wrong, the period of time where humans are actually changing the climate on our planet. And we are changing more than just the climate. We're also changing what's happening in the oceans. We're changing the surface of the Earth, and generally not in good ways. We have two wonderful speakers tonight. Our first will be Dr. Dwayne DeFries, PhD. He is an amazing guy. He is the executive director of the Indian River Lagoon Coalition and the National Estuary Program, looking out for the Indian River Lagoon, looking out for the health of it. And he has tremendous experience, years and years of experience, not only looking out for a lagoon, but traveling not over Florida, all over the United States, around the world. He is an avid surfer. He's a guy that knows our area from the ocean all the way into the St. Johns River. He's walked so many miles of it, and he's a guy that really knows it like the back of his hand. We've also got a real rock star in the astrophysics world, Hakeem Oluseyi. He will be joining us. He's not with us at this moment, but Hakeem, Dr. Oluseyi, is an astrophysicist. He is a distinguished research professor at Florida Tech. He was the Space Sciences Education Lead at NASA's Mission Sciences Directorate at the NASA headquarters. He's a powerful, inspirational speaker, and you might have seen him on television. He's written a couple of books. In fact, this book that's coming out, a story of his life, is called A Quantum Life, and that'll be available in bookstores in June. It's a remarkable story from a remarkable man. We do have a few things that we like to do, a little bit of business we like to conduct before we pick up the program with our speakers, our panel. And what I would love to do is to be able to introduce our Vice President, Karen Houston. Karen, are you available for us?
I am, Phil. Thank you so much. I'm pretty proud to be here tonight, being a part of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. The first thing I want to do is thank the APC Planning Committee. As I'm proud to be a part of that. Our APC program planners put together these events every month, and most of them seem to be timely. You know, with whatever's happening within our country or whatever. They're there for us. They put this program together, and I want to say thank you to them, and also to our speakers. And we're very proud to have you here tonight. We thank you so much for taking out your time, and to the guests that we have with us tonight with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. A few things, a little housekeeping things we want to say to you is, if you have been a member before, we really welcome you back. We ask that you renew your membership tonight. It's very easy to do. You can go on the website and do that. And all the memberships are now per calendar year. It used to be, memberships used to be during the date that you signed up, that would be your time to renew. But we're starting in January now. It's all per calendar year. So we thank you and hope that you will consider renewing your memberships. And we also want you to check out our website. It's upgraded now. It's www.scpaflorida. That's spelled out Florida. www.scpaflorida.com. And we ask that you like us on Facebook. Some of you will probably be on Facebook tonight, so we are asking that you check us out on Facebook as well. And our speakers tonight will be the ones that will determine our action items. Every event that we have, we ask you to take away from that event some type of action item. And so we're asking our wonderful speakers tonight to share with us what you think would be a good action item for us to do. And next month's meeting is going to be free speech. I'm right, you're wrong. We think that's a really catchy title, and we're working on speakers now. We think it's going to be a wonderful event, especially during this time of so many issues about free speech. So I'm going to turn it back over to Phil. Once again, I say thank you to everyone for being here, especially our speakers. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Karen. And our president, Raed Al-Shaibi, is very grateful to you for filling in for him. Raed had something that came up, and so he wasn't able to join us tonight. So on behalf of Raed, he wanted to say thanks to all of you, and thanks to our guests and speakers this evening. Well, our program tonight, again, is about looking at our planet, looking at our Earth, and looking at it from the unique perspective of from above. Now, we're both looking at it from above, and we also are going to be looking at it really from a super close-up view from the surface, from somebody that knows our Indian River Lagoon better than just about anybody that I know, and understands what's going on here in Brevard County throughout the Space Coast. And I'll hopefully be able to throw in a couple of words of my own. I am a retired pilot, and so I've had the good fortune of being able to watch our planet for the past 40 years from above myself. I actually flew an airplane as a photo mapping pilot. I was an aerial photographer for about 8 years and recorded some of the most devastating and horrific things you've ever seen. If you've ever heard of what a strip mine looks like, or maybe seen one from the ground, you cannot imagine the devastation that strip mining, or they call them mountaintop mining, another type of mining that's typically done in the Appalachians. Some of the things that I've seen are unbelievable. On the other hand, there are also some hopeful signs that I've seen as well, such as reforestation, places where after forestry, they go back and replant trees, and to see large areas that have been restored and sometimes regaining a natural strength again. So not all of human impact is necessarily horrible. But let's start by looking closely at our own neighborhood, our own backyard, our own Brevard County. Again, we are very, very lucky to have Dwayne DeFries, PhD. Dr. DeFries is going to be talking to us about his experiences. And after we're done with our panelists, by the way, for those of you that have joined us, when we're done with our panel discussion, then we're opening it up to all of our guests. Right now, everybody that's a guest is muted, so we'll be able to listen to our panelists speak. And then when we go to our Q&A session, we'll be able to allow you, if you're on Zoom, to ask questions. If you're on Facebook Live, maybe we'll be able to get some of your questions if you can write them out for us. But right now, it's our chance to welcome Dr. Dwayne DeFries. Welcome, Doc. Great to have you, buddy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go straight to the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, make sure we kind of get this all right the first time. Of course, it goes straight to the back of the slide, so you're going to get to see this whole thing in fast backwards. Dan, are we looking good?
We're looking good. Thank you.
Great.
Again, I want to thank the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and I do want to spend a few minutes at that planetary scale, because it's really interesting after 40 years of working, in the system, how closely what we see in the Indian River Lagoon and what we see kind of in the state of Florida kind of mirrors that larger global set of issues. And I wanted to put that kind of in an integrative perspective and just give you some of my thoughts of, 40 years of working, playing, trying to conserve this lagoon system. If you look back all the way to over a decade ago, a bunch of scientists in Stockholm, Sweden, asked a very important question. They said, what if we could set planetary boundaries, safe operating spaces with thresholds that are based on the best available science, and then we could watch the trend on a global scale. And I want to spend a few minutes because these are the big issues, whether you're thinking globally or if you're thinking locally. And I'm going to start at 1 o'clock, the surprise for me, even in 2015. So when you look at novel entities and a safe operating space, what novel entities really are these chemical pollutants, things like toxic, chemicals, other organic pollutants, radiation. And you would think that after, 50, 60, 70 years of looking at these toxicants in our environment, that we'd be able to assemble a global perspective on what is the tolerance of planet Earth, for each of these. And the fact is, there's not enough data to quantify that threshold. And clearly, it's an important threshold that we need to address and quickly, because we know that, these issues are really big issues. They're also issues that disproportionately impact communities of color, poor rural communities, urban centers, where you've got industrial, delivery right next to residential homes. So very important, a lot of work to do there. The next one, ozone depletion, is one of those happy stories of the planet. So our stratosphere filters ozone. And if we didn't have our atmosphere, if ozone, and you've all heard about the ozone hole, if ozone makes it to the planet, you will see dramatic shifts in UV radiation, impacting human health with cancers, changing the way plants respond to UV radiation. It is a big issue. And the good news there is that global environmental community got together with the Montreal Protocol, addressed that issue, and we no longer, are pushing that threshold of safe operating space. So we have lowered those chemicals that deplete ozone. It's a stable configuration. Perfect example of when we work together globally with the best scientific minds, even some of these really big problems can be addressed. The next is very similar to this, looking at the atmosphere. Aerosols, happen from all sorts of sources. The hairspray you use in the house, emissions. We know very little about how aerosols impact the atmosphere on a global scale. It's super complicated, and it's complicated both spatially, location, and temporarily over time. And so scientists are building models now to look at aerosol loading, but it's another area where we just don't have enough data to really make the case. One of the things you see in Facebook all the time, especially in relationship to corals, is this concern for ocean acidification. And without jumping into deep chemistry, it's already too late in the day for that. Basically, too much CO2 in the air. 50 years ago, scientists thought that the oceans could buffer, all of the CO2 that we could throw at the atmosphere. And the reality is the ocean can't. There is a capacity threshold, and we are moving quickly in ocean acidification. So this graph is 2015. You look at 2021 when they update this, we are going to be much closer to a global threshold on acidification. That very bright red line. So we'll be in the orange next time we look at it. But I do want to make a statement that's important. Ocean acidification is on a global scale. It impacts the entire food chain. Corals, plankton, it really, when you change pH, you've all tasted a lemon, or put a basic, put bleach on your hand and you can feel how it impacts your skin. Shifts in pH, little shifts make a big difference to little organisms. In the Indian River Lagoon, and I won't talk about it later, but I want to make this distinction early. We are suffering from coastal acidification, not driven only by this global change, but all the nutrients that are coming into the system are not just fueling algal blooms, but also really making some changes in pH. And I hate to say it, but we know very little about that entire system in the Indian River Lagoon. And a lot of us are working very closely with USGS, EPA, and others to upgrade our monitoring systems to start looking at this. This next one, biogeochemical flows, just think about it as nutrient loading. How we add fertilizer to land, to atmosphere, and ultimately to water. There's two major drivers, phosphorus and nitrogen. And when we have an algal bloom, it's like fueling, adding fertilizer to a lawn. We have over-fertilized the globe, and we have over-fertilized the Indian River Lagoon. And we are in a very serious position on a global scale, significantly exceeding that safe operating space. So we're beyond the zone of uncertainty, and we're going to need to address that as an urgent and immediate need. Freshwater use is an interesting one. It depends on where you are, and this is a global average. So if you happen to be in a desert country, fresh water may be way beyond, that zone of uncertainty. Thankfully for Florida, our problem is we have more water in places where we don't need it. But on average, we know that freshwater consumption is going up with the growing global population. And we're expecting that segment of the operating space for humanity to actually get in the yellow and orange really quickly over the next decade. Land use changes. I could argue that it's worse than it looks, but changes in land use are the drivers for bad water quality, harmful algal blooms. It's all about infrastructure and how we build. And I'm going to talk about that specifically for the Indian River Lagoon, but how we operate on land, our human footprint is the big driver for water quality and habitat and species. The next segment is broken into two very complex issues. We call it biosphere integrity, but it's really about the species, not just how many are out there, the genetic diversity, we call that biological diversity, but also the function of those species. You're seeing a lot of news right now about manatees dying in the Indian River Lagoon. Well, manatees, eat plants, normally seagrasses. When you lose seagrass, they are moving to forage. And when they exceed that carrying capacity, you wind up in that terrible place we are now, where the system adjusts itself. And so we are seeing catastrophic losses of species on a global scale. And then climate change, which back in 2015 was kind of in the yellow, transitioning to orange. We are emerging quickly to that red line threshold of uncertainty, which is high risk. It's not going to hit all areas equally, but all areas and regions and countries and cities need to recognize the trend. And so think about this as kind of a vital sign wheel for the globe. It's not all of the issues, but it is the big drivers of the issues. And if you look at humans in the extinction crisis, you can see a clear correlation. You know, as we move our human population, you know, beyond, you know, 7 billion, you know, we're going to see loss of habitat, loss of species. We're seeing that in the lagoon right now. And so those loss of species, this is important. If you think about kind of the role of every species in that fabric of an ecosystem, when you start pulling threads out of that mosaic, eventually the fabric breaks down. Every species has a role. Some of them we're not all that excited about, like mosquitoes, you know, or snakes sometimes, but they all have a functional role in the ecosystem. And when a species goes extinct, it's forever. You do not roll that clock back. And we are losing species at unprecedented rates right now, and it is an extinction crisis. So I want to jump down to kind of get out of the global scale and look at the Indian River Lagoon as a local example, you know, of how this looks. So Indian River Lagoon, you know, the proper lagoon is about 156 miles. And the real story about the lagoon is this: it is biologically diverse. It is ecologically different than any estuary ecosystem in America because it's super narrow, super shallow, poorly flushed by design. It's naturally a lagoon. So you don't see water flowing in and out, you know, with our tides. And so what you put in the system has a tendency to stay in the system. And then we have constrained that flow with human development. And I'll show you some examples. But we are also socially and economically diverse as well. That diversity provides great opportunities and great challenges, allows us to work with citizens, cities, counties, state, federal agencies, because you never manage a system like this in its entirety. You've got to look at the local conditions, understand what's driving those conditions, you know, and then start to mitigate where you can. And again, this all comes down to population change. You know, these are some old data that, amazingly enough, still are relevant today. But Florida's central, you know, Florida as a state is going to double its population somewhere between 2030, 2050. We'll see a similar trend in Central Florida. These maps were generated some 15 years ago by myregion.org, and it showed the trend line to urbanization, which is that really dark red, kind of the suburban sprawl. And then what's in green is what we've protected with conservation. And you will hear a lot of people, you know, say, oh my gosh, we just need to stop the immigration to Florida, which, by the way, last week was 1,500 people a day moving into our state. And it's not about the number. What millions of dollars of research showed back in 2005 to 2007 in the myregion.org partnership, it's not about if you grow. We are going to grow because people want to live in Florida. They want to retire here. It's a great place to, you know, work and live. It's actually about how you grow, how you put people in the right places, in the right densities. And so one of the aha moments of that multiple year process with 7 counties, you know, working together was that if you had a 2050 vision that focused on conservation, countryside centers and corridors, you know, you could actually not only get more conservation lands and green space, but you could protect agriculture and ultimately save about 66 billion in infrastructure that would be related to sprawl. Smart growth, smart regulatory strategies can build quality even in high density communities. And so when we start thinking about that land-water interface, and I'm not going to go through all these, I just want to give two big pictures. Chronic stress, which is everything from
Doc, it looks like we're getting a little
stress, could be human health. When you have a shock event, like a hurricane or a tropical storm or a flood, you are going to have problems. And, Lake Okeechobee discharges are an example of that stress event. So it's important for us to differentiate between, what is the source of pollution and what is a pathway? And then what is the scale, the temporal and spatial scale? It sounds kind of common sense, but on a science side, it's really challenging because it means we need data. And in some cases, we don't have it. So this is the lagoon over the last 10 years, a system that went from relatively clear water dominated by seagrasses, healthy fisheries, under stress, but somewhat buffering itself from the stress. And in 2011, we had a super bloom, and we've had problems every rainy season since, from cyanobacterial blooms to the south. The upper right-hand corner, you see the cyanobacterial bloom we had last year in Brevard County, which turned most of the lagoon pea soup green. And then down on the bottom, you see kind of how the system responds to those algal blooms. You can have new algae, or new critters, because they're not algae, they're different kinds of plankton, eating the algae that's there when the blooms collapse. But you can also have fish kills. So this is not a small event. This is our new reality. And then down south, these Lake Okeechobee discharges of sometimes as much as 9 billion gallons, create a real problem for the system. So what's the driver of this? It's very simple. It's all about our plumbing on land. It's about wastewater. It's about septic systems. There's over 300,000 in the watershed. It's about inadequate and antiquated stormwater systems. And then once these nutrients and sediments get into the lagoon, they start forming muck. And then muck actually generates its own nutrients. So you get into a vicious cycle. And that vicious cycle, the longer you go, the closer you get to a dramatic shift in the system. And we are there today. So we need to rethink clean water. And we need to think about the infrastructure that's needed, not just wastewater and stormwater and septic, but also the natural infrastructure of shorelines, oyster reefs and clams. And this means we're going to have to kind of turn the clock back, because the last 40 years, we have neglected maintenance and upgrade of these systems, and we are financially behind the curve. And it's a cost of doing nothing that's real and gets expensive by the year. So what I'd like to do is quickly share with you, because I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end, for some very simple truths that I have learned, that I believe in as a scientist and a 40-year resident, here in Brevard County. And the first is that ecosystem functions are complex. Anybody tells you they know exactly what's going on in the system, probably not telling the whole truth. This map is what the scientists mapped out during the 2011 algal bloom. It's been almost a decade, and as a scientist, I still struggle to understand what it means. But we need to understand those functional connections and then to monitor those trigger points. We are experiencing these phase shifts. So on that top graph, when we have really light nutrients and the system is buffering the stormwater, the septic systems, and we have low nitrogen and phosphorus, the system can adapt and be resilient to some inputs. As those inputs get greater in graph 2, more density, greater runoff, changes in rainfall patterns, we start losing seagrasses. We begin to have these seasonal algal blooms, fish, seagrasses are impacted. And then there's a point where the loads just become too much to handle, and you'll see a dramatic phase shift to a system that we don't recognize and a system we don't want, where we no longer have commercial fishing. We no longer have safe water to recreate and swim. We no longer have seagrasses to support species. And it is a heavy lift to turn that clock back. But the way to do it is by reducing nutrients. I mean, we know from experience in other estuaries that if you reduce nutrients, put the system on a nutrient diet from every source, you're going to get there. Water flow matters, and I just put two examples. You're looking at Kennedy Space Center at the top. That meandering creek is called Banana Creek, and at one point before Kennedy Space Center began development, the Banana River and the Mosquito Lagoon and the Indian River Lagoon were all connected as waterways through marshes and through Banana Creek. And construction of the crawlerway launch pads, have dissected, that communication. And now we have to manage differently because of those inputs. And in the next picture, the lower picture, you can see the impacts of causeways. And those causeway impacts are not minimum. So you're looking at 528 and 520, both Indian River Lagoon and Banana River, and you can see the tiny openings. So when you have a slow flow lagoon and you restrict flow even more, you're going to make that system more vulnerable to those inputs. And you can see the dramatic growth in Merritt Island, Cocoa Rockledge, and the narrowness, the shallowness. I mean, we have certain systems, and this is one area, Southern Mosquito Lagoon, Northern Indian River Lagoon, Banana River, that's a hot spot for chronic water quality problems. And so water flow matters. There are no silver bullet solutions. I mean, I get asked every day, what about a new inlet? What about a pump station? We need to chase after root causes and fix the root causes. There's a lot of work being done on some of those flow issues. Florida Tech has received funding from the Florida legislature. We have to consider all options, but the pathway to success is to fix the plumbing problem on land as a high priority and recognize nothing's going to happen fast. You got to have vision. You have to have planning. And thankfully, we already have done that in Brevard County and lagoon-wide. So the Save Our Indian River Lagoon project plan that has been updated since Brevard County voters instituted the half-cent sales tax. That sales tax is generating $30 million a year for 10 years for Indian River Lagoon restoration. It's science-based, it's sound, projects are underway. It's an example for the entire nation, and Brevard's residents should be proud that we had the vision, to support that discretionary sales tax. And then the program that I operate, the National Estuary Program, we're authorized under Section 320 of the Clean Water Act, and our authority is to develop a conservation and management plan with all of the partners along the lagoon. And that's a 10-year big picture plan on, what do we need to do and how do we get there? And the heart of that plan is a vital signs wheel, and I look at this as a giant highway with 32 lanes in the highway. Each one of those lanes points to a healthy lagoon. Each one aligns with our mission statement, one lagoon, one community, one voice. You cannot repair, recover, and be stewards of an ecosystem if you forget the communities and the people who live along that system. So we have a whole section on healthy communities, a whole section on communication, collaboration, and coordination, along with the things you hear about on a regular basis, water quality, habitats, living resources. This isn't about picking one and focusing on any one of these. So we like to say it's not about or, it's about and. And so whether you're a citizen, a city, or a county or a state agency, identify what vital sign you have responsibility for, that you will have authority over, that you have funding, and fix your problem. And that goes for citizens. You can fix problems on your residential lawns, in your home plumbing, just the way you use products like fertilizers and pesticides. It makes a difference. Everybody's got to identify their footprint, fix your problem, and everybody did this, we would see a restoring lagoon. Ecosystem restoration is really expensive, especially when we're trying to get in front of 20, 30, 40 years of inadequate maintenance. We have estimated the cost from multiple sources at about $5 billion, which if that was delivered over 20 years would be about $250,000. Already have 1,000 projects in a project list from our cities and counties. And when I throw that number out, this is what I often get. The first response is that look, and the second response is we can't afford it. And the answer is we can afford it, but it's not about cost, it's about value. And so if you look at the value, the contributed value of the Indian River Lagoon every year, it's about 7.6 billion in economic value to the counties along the lagoon within the region. This work was done in 2016 by the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, with funding from Department of Economic Opportunity. The number that surprised me, and this has been verified from other independent studies, although they vary depending on approach, somewhere between $20 and $33 is returned in value for every dollar you put into restoration. A lot of that's tough to quantify. How much is quality of life worth to you? How much is tourism worth to the state of Florida? So we need to look at this value proposition and not just the cost. This is an area I love. I was in industry, so I'm kind of a technology geek, even though I don't know anything about it. I wish I could think of something really good, but I'm too old. This is going to be the next generation of scientists. And also NASA, I expect a lot of technology offshoots. But as we get better with innovative technologies that address these specific problems, we can make our work more efficient, faster in delivery. So reduce the timeline for restoration. And this is just one example from one country, Cedron Technologies, where they've already developed the 21st century sustainable wastewater treatment plant for Africa. It's now being permitted in the United States, and a really interesting kind of 21st century, totally, encompassed toilet. So, this is within the realm of our expertise if we invest in innovation and disruptive technologies. But human behavior is a big driver. And no amount of financial investment, actually takes the place of adaptive change. We need to look back and say, what worked, what didn't, but doing it the same way we did 10 years, 20 years, and thinking somehow the outcome's going to be different, simply, is an inefficient, ineffective way of looking at business. And so we need to be forward-looking and adaptive in our thinking, which means we have to think out of the box. And some of this is changing from what I would call incremental management, kind of just moving along, doing a few projects, and really what I would call transformational change leadership. And that takes individuals who are willing to make change, not say I want change, but I'm willing to make change, whether it's in my life, in my corporation, in my service to community, because this is going to be driven from the bottom up by leadership and action, and not just talking about, somebody else doing the hard work. And this happens, it's not just ecological, It's a challenge both on the social, political, and economic landscapes. This is always a problem as a scientist, and I know it is for many of you who are not scientists. You look at the web these days, it's hard to differentiate between good information and bad information, the sources of information. And so, you want science-based, decisions and data-driven decisions. But, I wish I had a reference to this. I was looking for it today, and I don't have it, unfortunately, but I made a note to myself, this is an incredible statistic on what happens in 60 seconds on the World Wide Web. It's no wonder we're confused. I mean, nobody can keep up with this flow of information. Anybody who posts, looks like an expert. So the challenge for all of us is to do our homework. Try to differentiate what is good information from bad information. And I think there's an opportunity and a responsibility here among the scientific community who very rarely engage, at that social media level on their individual scientific, platforms. Something gets published, somebody reads it, and then somebody interprets it, and then a nonprofit may post it. Scientists, I think, have a responsibility and opportunity to start using this social media as a platform to tell us, what they did, how they did it, and what it means.
1 minute, Dr. DeFries.
I'm close. I'm going to make it. Expect failures and embrace failures. Success is not going to be a straight line. When we have failures, we need to learn from them. And right now, we have a number of individuals who, rightfully so, they question, both on the science side and the community, when is it a good time to actually do clam restoration, oyster restoration? And the answer is, it's a hard thing to answer. You don't want to invest a lot of money and have failures because you didn't do your homework, but there needs to be some risk taking so we learn how to do these things, quicker, faster, and better. And so we have to engage in some risky, endeavors and then learn from both the successes and the failures. Partnerships are essential. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a hallmark of the National Estuary Program. I report to over 100 individuals in 3 oversight committees. They get to view all of the work that we do within our program. And it's incredibly important that the scientists, the citizens, and community leaders are in the same room, having the same conversation, and that all are equal in that discussion. And it comes down to individual action, picking up litter, going out and, doing an education or environmental event, that dedication of time and treasure is important. And every individual that engages can make a big difference. And that routes itself up, ramps itself up into community action. And lastly, you got to have balance. Stewardship is not about just throwing money at projects, and it's not about the non-regulatory world. Regulation needs to support the outcomes that we want. And we have work to do in making sure those are all aligned. And then we need to have resolve. It took us decades to get here. It's going to take us decades to reverse the trends. But the good news from Tampa Bay, good news from areas in Puget Sound, Chesapeake Bay, is with that investment of time and vision and treasure, we can make meaningful change and get back a system. And it's not just about the environment, it's about human health, quality of life. So clean water is everybody's business. And a hedgehog approach is necessary. We need to be tough, we need to be resolved. Every decision we make needs to be headed in a single direction: clean water, healthy communities, sustainable communities. And we'll be at it for decades to come. So I'll leave you with this one last thought. And the thought is not mine, but when I look at how exciting the future is for Kennedy Space Center, how exciting this possibility of colonization, back on the moon, maybe on Mars in the future. And I think about the technology outcomes, especially in water technology. It reminds me of something Carl Sagan said many, many years ago. Here's a quote. "Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everybody you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, where our species, the human species, could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand, and that stand is about protecting our planet and our community for future generations." Thank you.
Dr. Dwayne DeFries, I'd tell you what, if this was our normal meeting, we had a room full of people, you'd be getting a standing ovation again. We really, really appreciate your being with us tonight, and your thoughts are very important. And I'm going to ask you, if you would please, to be thinking about an action item that you might like our audience to be considering. We'll talk about that when we're completed with our panel discussion tonight. But an action item, something that everybody that's here can do. There are 1,000 things we could do, but our challenge is to kind of filter it down. It's a fantastic view, a close-up view, and as well as a macro view of the impact of humans on our planet. Our next speaker is a real rock star. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, I'm Phil Stasek. I'm the past president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and our event tonight is called A View from the Sky, Our Impact on Earth. We're looking at our Earth from above, our Earth from outside in, and maybe a little from the inside out. We've got two magnificent speakers tonight. You just heard Dr. Dwayne DeFries, who is the executive director of the IRL Coalition, part of the National Estuary Program, taking a really interesting close look at human impacts and things that clearly are changing our Earth. Up next, we have Hakeem Oluseyi. Dr. Oluseyi is a PhD. He's a distinguished research professor at Florida Tech. He's also served as Space Sciences Education Lead at NASA's Mission Science Directorate at NASA headquarters. A powerful, inspirational speaker, TV. He's actually written a couple books. There's one that's going to be coming out here in June about his life, a quantum life. It is a fantastic story. And I'll tell you what, his background is magnificent. But his perspective this evening is going to be talking about the Earth as we view it from our satellites, as we view it from above. The interesting thing is to remember that we really had never seen Earth from higher than, say, a mountain until the invention of the airplane or the hot air balloon. And then once we got a chance to get above, we got a little bit different perspective on it. But once we went into space, some of the very first sounding rockets, these are little rockets, were shot up in the 50s. Did we actually get to see what a hurricane looks like from above? Up until that time, it was a concept that people had only seen from the surface of the ocean or from the shoreline, winds blowing, rain. When you get the view from above, you realize that you can see the circulation, you can see the impact on our planet. And so the view from above is so important. And so we welcome Dr. Oluseyi. Hakeem, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, sir. I hear you loud and clear, and thank you on pronouncing my name almost correctly.
please correct me. What's the correct pronunciation?
There's correct and there's correct. I'll give you correct. It's Oluseyi. Oluseyi. Now, it is actually a declaration. So if you were in West Africa, where they will tell you how to pronounce it correctly, they would say it's Oluseyi.
Well, I'll tell you what, again, it is an honor to have you here with us tonight and to
I'm
talk
honored
to
to be
us
here.
about the view. I know that you're an astrophysicist. I know that you're into cosmology. You can talk to us about looking out at the universe and the interaction, our place in the universe. But I know that you've also done a lot of work looking back at our planet. And sir, I'm going to let you have the floor. Please tell us your perspective.
Thank you so much. First off, I want to say that it's really good to see some old friends here. So for those of you who don't know me, I was your neighbor on the Space Coast for several years, from January 2007 until 2015. So it's good to see you all, and I envy your winter weather still. But at least now that I live in the mid-Atlantic, when I travel somewhere during January or February, I'm aware that it's winter, so I take a jacket with me. Whereas when I lived there, I'd often find myself without one. I have been fortunate to have worked in space research. I started off flying sounding rockets from White Sands Missile Range and building instrumentation to go on rockets and then on satellites. And when I was at Florida Tech, myself with two of my fellow professors, one was Laszlo Bakshai, he passed away about a year ago, and the other is Don Platt. The three of us worked with UNESCO and the Russians to develop UNESCO's first satellite. And we actually developed a Earth observing telescope along with our students to look down at Earth and do both water management and crop and land management. But I'm going to share my screen with you right now. And what I have here, I hope I do this correctly. You know what? Let me do that. Share. And so do you all see my presentation now?
Looks
Yes,
great.
we do.
Awesome. Yeah, so NASA has a fleet of Earth observing satellites. And this animation here shows you what that fleet looked like as of 2018, 3 years ago. So of course there have been some upgrades. And what I find really amazing is I'm a fan of old maps, and the idea that humans could actually map out the shape of the continents and get it correctly, such that when we actually develop the ability to step back and take a look, we see that our maps are actually pretty accurate. But there's a lot more that we can do now. One thing we can do is monitor changes in ice, atmosphere, land, water, vegetation. And that tells us a lot about what's happening on our planet currently, because we tend to think of our planet as a steady state system, but it's not. It's been constantly evolving. Now, what you see here is a slide that shows you weather from space. And that's what we think about. We think about monitoring the Earth from space. And this one is going to show you hurricane tracks from, over the course of 6-7 years or so. But, Earth is much more complicated than just a rock covered in water, wrapped in gas. Geology interplays with life. And if you ask me, I'd say that life is a geological process, right? From the very beginning, life came into existence and it began changing the chemical composition of the oceans and the atmosphere. And in fact, it killed itself off a couple of times, right? Made the planet freeze over. And so humans are another geological force and we are interacting with our planet, and we don't always know if it's going to be good or bad, right? We don't know when we start a behavior if what we're doing is good or bad. And sometimes we never know. Take this one behavior for example, I'll call it agriculture. Is it good or is it bad, right? Some people would argue if humans remain hunter-gatherers, we could live for another, tens of millions of years. But now that we're civilized, we're going to wipe ourselves out quickly, right? So, there is an interplay between the ocean, the land, the water that's on the land, the water that's in the atmosphere. And by looking at the system as a whole from space, we can now sort of get a grip on it and understand our situation. And understand this, our atmosphere is so thin. I don't think humans get a real appreciation for that. And one way that I know we don't appreciate it is in science fiction. You're like, where is Hakeem going with this, right? What do our spacefaring future, I don't know if we still call them astronauts, explorers do when they get to another planet, right? They get there and they look up at the night sky, right? They look up at the sky, at their stars and at their moons, right? That is very, very rare. We have a very thin atmosphere that we can look out of only because we have a very strong magnetic field, only because we have a planet that's still large enough to have a liquid iron core that also happens to be spinning very rapidly, right? So the chances that you're going to have a sky to look at, that's highly unlikely if you're a life form on another planet, because where there are liquids, it's not likely that those liquids are going to be under a thin atmosphere. And our satellites do a lot more than just monitor weather today, right? We can monitor the entire Earth system virtually, right? We monitor the magnetic fields. We can look at the winds. And so if you look up at the top left corner here, you see the names of agencies and satellites or centers that produce this data. And so we have data of individual gases in our atmosphere, temperature, waters, density, aerosols, you name it. So here is an example of what we call a data cube. And this data cube is a data cube from a storm. We typically get these 2D views, but now we can break it up and get this nice 3D view of the storm. And this is, again, done from space. You can imagine we could do this from the ground with radar, but this is actual NASA data from NASA's space-based assets. Here we have precipitation rates globally for both liquids and frozen liquids, and this is done every 30 minutes. Think about that, right? We do this for both the Earth and for the sun, but our NASA's assets are able to give us the status of the sun's atmosphere and our atmosphere at this very high cadence. And we're just at the beginning of it. When you think about all that can be done with artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and machine learning, we'll be able to predict things farther into the future than we ever dreamed, is what I imagine. And here we're looking at vegetation fraction, right, worldwide. So we can combine data like this with the climate data and the human population data, and we can identify possible hotspots, possible areas of danger. And that's already being done, of course. Here is crop intensity. Even though there's vegetation, right, crop intensity is something else. And this is being done, again, from NASA data. And what you can see here is that 82% of the world's crops are produced by this small number of countries. And here is where a population is added. And if you look, what's coming up next is the countries where the population is expected to double by 2050. And what you see is that they do not correlate to where the food is being produced. And this is not even taking into account any effects of global warming and changing sea coasts and what impact that may have on migrations. So we see that, with the growing human population, with the change in climate, with the change in our resources, we need to put up more satellites is what we need to do, right? We have a situation that's very complex that our survival depends on, and a lot of people's survival depends on. Here's an example of methane production on our planet, right? This is, I don't know about you, but the nerd in me just wants to giggle at data like this. This is planet-wide. And, the shame of it is that we don't see ourselves as a planetary species, right? We're in all our little cliques and group and political castes. But, when you look at things as a scientist, we are really all in this together in this planet. And if you look at the planet on the time scale of billions of years and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of years, just like the good doctor before me spoke, Earth is our best shot. We better take care of it. We're very clever. I believe that we do have the ability to do what it takes to take care of Earth. Do we have the will, the political will? That's the question for me. And here we are looking at carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Both methane and carbon dioxide are strong greenhouse gases. And in our current era, global climate change is one of the big issues that we're dealing with, that we have to deal with, that's going to really change things for us. Now, again, you know, I look at the universe in two time frames, now and on time frames of 100 million years, right? 100 million years from now, right? I would love for the human species to still be here 100 million years from now. So we can, we're in control of that in large measure if we do the right things. And a big portion of that involves doing this space research, right? What's going to wipe us out is ourselves and not managing our planet properly. And we also have to monitor space and make sure no planet destroying events are coming our way that we can't mediate early enough. So I think that space and, you know, how we see ourselves as one human family are key to our future survival. And now we're looking at global temperature anomalies from the 19th century through the current era. And the temperature of the Earth has changed drastically over the years, over Earth's surface, right? We have been frozen for tens of millions of years, and we've been virtually a complete desert, right? So think about it like that. The temperature of the Earth is what you set it as, right? We are the thermostat of the planet, right? We say that the Amazon is the thermostat of the planet. Really what we're saying is that life is the thermostat of the planet. And we are the life forms that have the ability to analyze the situation and change our behavior in order to set things the way we want them to be. And so if you look at the current temperature anomaly, we see that, you know, the hottest years on record have been our recent years. And that's having broad impacts throughout our oceans, our croplands, as well as our atmosphere. And this is ocean anomalies, but this is temperature anomalies in the ocean. It's supposed to change, but this is the not temperature anomalies, but the altitude of the ocean, basically. Variations in the sea surface height. So what we see is that the seas are primarily rising, and that's due to melting ice. So here on the next slide, we see ice loss from Antarctica. Now, the thing to notice about the graph in the bottom left is that the mass loss is increasing as you go down. All right. So today in Antarctica, you're looking at nearly 3,000 gigatons of mass loss in a year. When we look at Greenland, we're looking at almost 5,000 gigatons of ice loss in a year. And so that ice loss is changing the salinity of the seawater, it's changing the temperature of the seawater, it's changing the flows of the seawater, and it's changing global climate patterns. And again, you know, it's within our control to reverse the system if we can. And here's a satellite that can actually use ground penetrating radar to measure under the glaciers. So all of these I've taken from the NASA Data Visualization Studio, which is in Goddard Space Flight Center. And when I worked at NASA headquarters, I no longer do, nor am I speaking for NASA. I learned that because this material is all produced with our tax dollars, you can use it for whatever you want. You can actually put it on a t-shirt and sell it if you want. But what it's being used for is real science. And so here it's for understanding the changes in glaciers with time due to global climate change. But people also use ground penetrating radar for archaeology, for example. You can actually map out ancient cities underneath the ground. They're now being used in looking for petroleum resources. And again, you know, just thinking about Earth's history, the fact that we had hundreds of millions of years for plant matter to decay, to collect without decaying so that we can have coal and oil and gas today is pretty lucky for us as well. Well, anyway, thank you for that brief introduction, and your takeaway as a to-do item for changing the world is to buy the hardcover copy of this book. Every copy that you buy puts money in my pocket.
Well, I'll tell you what, Doc, we really appreciate it because I'll tell you what, this is a great book, a great read, and it is something that will be going on sale in, I guess you can pre-order it right now. It's going to be released in June. Is that right?
Yes, sir. June 15th.
Okay, and this story is about your life, and that is in itself is an amazing story. I suspect we could probably talk a couple hours about that on its own. It is an amazing story. Your life, I tell you what, your life story is dazzling. It's neat. I was so interested. You and Phil Plake came to the Gleason Center to it's at FIT and talked. I hope that everyone that's on this program tonight, on this Zoom program on our Facebook live feed, gets a chance to read that book and a chance to, if you get you could go look on YouTube, look up the Discovery Channel. You can find the doc talking about his place in the universe, but his place on this planet is amazing, and we are very, very, very lucky to have you. I can tell you, sir, that if we had our normal meetings in our normal venue, you'd have a standing ovation, an audience full of people here giving you some applause. But I tell you what, everybody here will have a chance to ask a question. We're now getting into the Q&A period. So those of you that are here with us on the Zoom program, if you are interested, you can raise your hand by going to the little reaction button, depending on what kind of device you're on, whether it's a laptop or a phone or an iPad. There are different ways of getting at it, but look for the little reactions. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you. We'll unmute you and you can ask a question either of Hakeem or of Dwayne. Each of them has experience in different areas. One of the things that's really wonderful about tonight is you guys can each talk about a really different perspective on what's happening on the planet. So again, I suspect we have folks that probably have been wondering about things. I personally just saw something that actually was a push notification from NASA's climate change site. And it was saying that on March 25th, they just released a study, some research that's been ongoing. I think it was the Ceres instrument that for the first time has actually directly measured, and it has been confirmed over a long period of time, the human impact on climate change. And we've been using modeling. We've been able to take measurements of CO2 from mountaintops, and we've been able to measure things in a lot of different ways. This is a satellite that's been directly measuring climate change in a quantifiable way. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard anything about that project? It's a report that was just released and very exciting. Our friends at NASA have so much information. You could spend a lifetime on NASA's websites learning about everything from what's going on Mars to right here on our planet. The Earth Sciences section is amazing. Doc, when you take a good look at your experience looking at the Earth, have you had an epiphany? Have you, like many people that get away from the Earth and look back at it, have you had an epiphany of, oh my gosh, you fill in the blank?
Oh man, absolutely. And it's even for me, it's bigger than that, because I look at the cosmos, and one of the things I like to talk about is when I develop the ability to see the sky in 3D. All right. If you know if you have an idea of the size of one object, like the Earth, right? From that, you can extrapolate and get so I know that the moon is a quarter the Earth's size and about 65 Earth radii away, right? I know that the sun is 100 times bigger than the Earth, and the Earth is about 200 solar radii away. Now, when you take that to the level of galaxies and start thinking about the universe, man, I always describe this, before you go observing at night, you can't trust your telescope. You tell your telescope, I'm going to give you these coordinates, dial it and point in that direction. But you don't know for sure if it's pointed at the right place. So what you can do in the modern era is go to a website and download an image of that region of the sky. So you can compare the dots in your photograph to the dots that you're supposed to see, right? Whenever you go download such an image, you're looking in our galaxy beyond to the universe. There's always galaxies in the background. And man, I'll download an image and just get stuck looking at, just imagining these things. Like, imagine this. The nearest large galaxy to us, the Andromeda Galaxy, at 2 million light years away, taking into account that things get smaller the farther away they are, how big does it appear in our night sky at 2 million light years distant, right? You would imagine this little tiny speck, but it's actually 6 times bigger than the full moon, right? So...
And you can see it with your eyes. If you go outside with a pair of binoculars, in fact, even without binoculars, if you're in a dark site and you know where to look, it's right up there, son of a gun, in Andromeda. And it's really one of the great things for anybody that's ever been in a dark sky setting where you can really, really see the Milky Way. You can see some of these details, globular clusters that you can see with your eyes. It's amazing. I see we have a question up right now. Ellen Jones, are you ready? Ellen, can you come off?
I am. That was great. I just sat there with my mouth agape the whole time. Both of you. And this question is for either or preferably both of you. Could you address the need for or importance of the reduction of our dependence on animal products for global warming, environmentally? Or whatever
who would like to take that first? The impact of not only agriculture, but animal agriculture.
Let's go in alphabetical order.
All right, I'll jump in. Smooth move on that one, because it's a tough question. We are driven as a human society by, cultural norms. And there's no question that when you look at agriculture, especially big industrial agriculture, that, there are footprints within that industry that are really large on a global scale and need to be addressed. But it's also true, I think, that, thinking that we will see a culture shift, from kind of an omnivore society to more plant-based, you can see that happening now kind of in certain sectors, but what a affluent country like America can do, versus some of the countries I've visited over the years where, basically, clean water in any meal will do. We have to kind of address this, both from a social, scientific, and then also through, and I agree with Hakeem, I think technology, and especially the offshoots of space technology, are going to be really big players in this story. So if we decide to colonize the moon, we're going to have to address, how do you recycle everything? And what is that diet going to look like, with the least amount of impacts? And we're going to need to make it small and efficient and light for space travel. But, I think the key is, this is going to be a long cultural shift. And I worry that in the political world of trying to push too hard on some of these large cultural issues, you actually do more damage than good, because we are still reliant on animal protein. It's still a big delivery system, and one could argue that a cow-calf operation is possibly less impactful if it's done in a sustainable way than a massive industrial plant operation that's relying on pesticides, herbicides, and growth promoters in order to get those plants to the volume we need. So really good question. It's part of the big picture mix, but a tough issue to kind of resolve on both the national scale, and it ultimately comes down to personal choice. And I think personal choice will drive the marketplace, of, do you go fish? Do you go cattle? Do you go, chicken? Do you go vegan? And I've done all of them. And I struggle with vegan even now. I mean, I'm from New York. If I pass a hot dog place and I smell it, I have a really hard time.
Well, I just like to say, Ellen, my way of dealing with it is slightly different, and it may be even more effective. I just eat the humans. And so
Okay.
that was a joke. All right.
It is April Fool's Day,
I
guys.
got it, Doc.
No, I don't actually eat humans, but I will say this, ma'am. I've thought about, so I tend to be optimistic, and I always looked at cynical people like, oh, why are you so cynical? And then I looked at the changes that I saw in my own life, and I found myself becoming more cynical. I grew up in the deep woods of Mississippi, and I loved being in the woods. In fact, when I went to graduate school, when I left Mississippi, I found that I couldn't take living among, as I would say, among the asphalt and right angles. And so I'd go up to Northern California and live in the woods over the weekend. I'd spend 3-4 days living in the woods. But anyway, what I saw is the loss of biodiversity around me. And I'm just like, I go back home and, it's not just the animals that are missing, but it's also certain fruit-bearing trees and plants that bear fruit and berries and things. And the fact that they're missing and nuts tells me maybe that means that the pollinators are gone, right? Now I was really, 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 really worried about that. But as a physicist, I think about that old Mark Twain apocryphal quote, which is, applied to physics. What keeps you from moving forward is not what you don't know, it's what you know that ain't so. And I asked myself, I said, you know what? I always think that if I lived on a planet that was completely covered in asphalt, that was all one urban planet, and the only animals that lived are the ones that I eat, wear, pet, whatever, that to me, my gut instinct is like, that doesn't work. That can't exist. But then I asked myself, do I really know that? Do I really know that can't exist? I don't, and so now I'm really confused about what I really do know and what I really don't know. It's really clear that the way what we've done to things means that in the future we can't do things the way we've done in the past because we're changing. I don't want to use the word ruining. I'll say changing things so drastically, but at the same time we're so innovative. And I'm really cynical about the human population growing out of control. And politically, you can't even discuss that. You can't even bring it up because what's the solution? And so on the one hand, I'm like, okay, the future is looking pretty dire if we don't take the right steps. Can we figure out what those steps are and take them? I feel incredibly optimistic about that.
I know that whenever I go out, I'm into electric cars, and I go out and talk to people about the impact of switching from a gasoline-powered car to an electric car. But one of the things that is most important in reducing our carbon footprint, and thus the feeding carbon into our environment, is of course changing your diet, and that's one of the things that many people will talk about. It's much more easy to talk about it today than it was 10 years ago. And young people today that are in high school, kids in junior high school, they know how to spell vegan. When I was a kid, we didn't know what the word meant.
That's a vegan.
And in fact, I have a sister that's a vegan, and it's one of those things that discussion comes up quite a bit. It's very, very, very good question, I think, is trying to reduce our carbon footprint in any way that we can. And I tell you what, I'd love to get everybody into an electric car right now. But, for people that want to make a change right now, what you can do? Go out and put a couple more pounds per square inch in the tires of your current car. Put a little more air pressure in your tires, and it makes your car more efficient. The next time you go driving, hey, you know what? Drive the speed limit. Watch what happens to your gas mileage and thus your consumption of fuel. That's in your current car. No matter what you're driving, you can be more efficient at what you're doing. You can adjust the thermostat and all that sort of thing. But what you eat really makes a difference too. No doubt about it. I know we have a question waiting. Larry Abdullah, you have a question. Your hand's up. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
You're up, Larry.
Yes. I'm waiting for a quantum life From the Streets to the Stars. I have it on order, but I bought this book, which I think my grandkids are going to love, Spaceopedia.
So we're really trying to sell books tonight here, right?
Thank you. I appreciate you.
So my first question, one example of where planetary data has been the input, and we have had global cooperation to solve a problem, is the ozone problem. And I know that we've reduced refrigerants, and I think the ozone layer is shrinking, and we've helped solve that, which could cause high infrared radiation. So this may be a tough question, but can you guys think of another, or maybe it's not, but some areas where satellite data has spurred cooperation and problems have been solved?
Well, see, you threw me off there. I was going to say we did have another climate crisis that we called acid rain, but I'm not sure it was satellite data that tipped the scales on that one.
And I'll jump in really quick. It's a work in progress, but when you couple remote sensing, at regional and global scale, and you couple it with, on the ground, the traditional monitoring, one of the things we're seeing just for the Indian River Lagoon is the emergence of remote sensing modeling that is not just hindcast, but becomes forecast modeling. So the Water Management District is taking, pretty much off the shelf chlorophyll A data, which is available on a global scale. And they asked the question, if we took our hydrology models and we put water quality, into that model, could we hindcast what happens in a harmful algal bloom? And while it's not fully verified or validated yet, the answer was not only yes, but 5 years from now, that technology that came out of space is going to allow us to be able to answer one of the tough questions. And that is, if I put $1 million into this project, and this project is reducing nitrogen and phosphorus by, 300 pounds of phosphorus, 3,000 pounds of nitrogen, might we be able to predict the ecological response from that input? We are on the threshold of that. And that the only way this works is with these remote sensing global technologies. And the power is profound. I mean, you saw the graphics that Hakeem showed, but if you think about the data that's driving those, those graphics, you think about just the data that drives, and this is a sore point for me, being a surfer. I don't want one model that's going to help me. I want an ensemble of 20 models that are fighting each other. And we have that with hurricane prediction. And even that becomes challenging, the further out you go. But the more data, the more refinement, we are really at what I think is a social and scientific transformation in our ability to do predictive.
I would add to that the data
modeling at any scale.
Oops, I think, we had a little buffering there at the end of your point there, Doc.
Oh, sorry. I think I stepped on you. Are we back to live?
Yes, I think we're back to live. Everything looks nominal.
We're back.
Go ahead, Hakeem.
I just wanted to add that, all of these sensors that we have everywhere, taking all of this data, even if we don't do what you're describing today, Larry, the data is still there, right? And so as techniques are developed, this modeling, I'll give you an example. Old geological survey data, right? So now a lot of us who do big data and machine learning look at time series data. So in my case, I look at stars, you measure their brightness and you get an error on their measurement, and you measure that star for years and years and years, you get this thing called a light curve. Well, Imagine if you have a time series that's seismology. We learned that perhaps America's enemies were hiding nuclear explosion device testing in the aftershocks of large earthquakes. Can we now go and look back at those geological traces and use these techniques to identify the outliers, right? That's one such technique. But in the future, now that we have all this climate data, I'm sure they're going to be able to look at this data and find correlations that may not make any sense, but they're going to say, oh, they're going to be able to say there will be a overabundance of rain there. There will be a drought there. The crops there will have this year you should plant that. I think that we're infants in our ability to do this type of predictive modeling.
The patterns are emerging. The more closely we look at the data and the historic data, literally, I know as we go back and look at gases that are trapped in ice in glaciers, this is data that's just waiting for us to use it. And from above, we're now collecting, or we have been collecting in the space age, for the past 30, 40, 50 years, collecting data that doesn't go away, some of it anyway. When I flew photo mapping airplanes, one of the things that's very interesting that you had asked about is, remember, we're not necessarily just talking about the view from space, but today we have all sorts of airborne resources, such as aircraft and drones, that are providing large amounts of data that are giving us a perspective of the Earth and the impact of human activity all over the planet. This allows us to go places where humans don't ordinarily get to go. If you're in a boat or you're in a car or you're walking on the surface, you can't necessarily see what's over the next hill. I can tell you that one of the things that I did was we actually quantified. We measured output from power plants. And we measured, they call them fly ash piles. It's the most disgusting stuff you've ever seen. When they empty the scrubbers at a coal-fired power plant, they got this stuff and they have to do something with it. Well, you know what? You can measure that. You can determine the output. You can determine what they're doing, whether they're controlling it properly. The mining, I mentioned mapping strip mines, some of the largest scars on the face of the Earth. And of course, you can see them from space, but they're required by law in order to reclaim those mines, to return that surface back to arable or back to the condition it was supposedly in before. These are all things that are good because we have the view from above, because we have evidence, it becomes usable in court. We can hold people accountable to the damage that they do to the surface of the Earth. We can reveal impacts that humans are having that are otherwise not appreciable. When you see images from the International Space Station, the astronauts love to get into this area they call the cupola. It's got a number of very large windows. It's Earth facing, and they use long lenses, and they have typically a whole menu of targets to photograph. And so not only do we have satellites, automated systems, we have real human beings with their eyes, with large cameras, and they're photographing objects that appeal to them at the time, or that they've been told, hey, try to capture this. You can see volcanic impacts, and of course, volcanoes themselves erupt at times where we never detect it. And the only way that we know it's going off is because an astronaut might have captured an image of it, or a satellite captured an image of it. And that has a tremendous, volcanic eruptions have a tremendous impact on our climate. Let's see, do we have another question? I'm not sure that I see anybody right now.
Say something that all the sciences, all the Earth sciences have had major advancements from the view from the sky. I think none of them would be the same. And when you think of meteorology, think what has been done for us there in terms of warning and maybe changing.
It is one of the strange things that people can be in denial about the human impact on the planet. Anthropogenic climate change, is something that really, in my experience, in my traveling and going to other countries, I find that most other people in most other countries aren't really questioning it. It's here in the United States for political reasons that this becomes a disputed topic. Otherwise, it's accepted as scientific fact because there is so much evidence. I'm wondering if either of our speakers tonight, or both of you, could talk about that topic of climate denial, climate change denial, and your experience with it. As you talk to people, you talk to audiences, and there are surely people that raise their hands and call you a liar or say, "Oh, this isn't really happening. You can't prove it." What has your experience been? Who would like to pick that one?
I'll jump in first on that. Leave the hot seat for Hakeem. Climate change denial isn't just an individual denial. It has been an agency denial, depending on, what period of time we're working. And so, skepticism is a healthy part of science. But what's not healthy is denial of data, denial of profound, long data sets and trends. And so what worries me, and worried me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and still worries me today is, this is an uncomfortable conversation, especially in Florida, if you start looking at the models for just sea level rise and the impact of sea level rise on major infrastructure, including infrastructure at Kennedy Space Center. I remember giving a presentation back in 2009 up in Washington, D.C. at NASA headquarters, and showed some early GIS maps, that showed the whole range, and the reaction was mixed. And on the negative side, it was, oh, gosh, we wish you hadn't shown that data, because it's hard to put your arms around, some things you can't change. And so my message on climate change has been and continues to be, this is a big problem. It's a global problem. It's about how we live on this planet, which includes the questions we've just posed and many, many others. And we know already where the big CO2 push points are. We know already where those thresholds need to be. And so now it's more about taking the science into that political world of action where there is acceptance and respect and trust of the scientific evidence. We've got some work to do on that even now, because it is an uncomfortable conversation for many. But what I have seen just in the last 4 or 5 years, clearly with the National Estuary Program, I've got friends in Puerto Rico and a National Estuary Program there. I've got friends in Miami. One of my closest friends is the climate change, manager for Miami-Dade. When all of a sudden you have flooding repeatedly in your urban area and there's no storm, all of a sudden now climate change becomes tangible and real, and the conversation shifts from denial to, how do we act? And so we still have work to do here, but I think it's shifting dramatically, to the right place. It just took us, climate change science goes back 40 years, especially in oceanography. All of this stuff was predicted, 4 decades ago. We just didn't know the trends, the timelines, the full impacts. But this idea that the oceans were going to be an unlimited buffer for CO2, nobody ever believed that 40 years ago. So I'm guardedly optimistic that we've turned the corner on this, but we have to have a lot of due diligence and vigilance within the science community to make sure we're vetting our data, staying true to the factual, objective approach to our data. And it goes back to the comment I made in my presentation. The scientists need to fill the void, of communicating to the public, and not let NGOs, not let the general public be the translators of science, for policymakers. We have to be engaged as a scientific community at a level that we haven't had for a long, long time. And for many, it's very uncomfortable.
Joel Uche, what do you say?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think it's important which scientists. You made a point earlier about strategy and political strategy, and I think that's well placed. And you know, I remember being in a postdoc, and I was a member of a team that was put forth a satellite that was going to be around $1 billion. So we'd get visits from heads of office and places like this, congressional committees. And I remember being in there one time with, you know, 3 people more senior than myself that were on my team and these 4 congressmen. And they were all from these very fancy universities, right? And the head of the committee comes over to me, he's like, "Hey, Hakeem, what's going on?" And, you know, the congressman from Nebraska, you know, felt very comfortable chatting with the dude from Mississippi, right? Just based on vibe, how I come across, that sort of thing, right? And I think in some ways, when we look at this climate change denial, flat earth and all that kind of stuff, those people aren't really denying truth. They're like, dude, I don't like you.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. You're one of them, we're one of us, jocks versus nerds, whatever the case is. You know, it's more of a political thing, right? And so if scientists think that presenting the facts alone are going to, you know, that's like talking to somebody into dating you. Hey, I'll tell you why. You know, it doesn't work that way, right? You know, there's a human element to it. And so, you know, you talk to different people. So when I'm talking to my friends, you know, which is a broad group of people, and anytime they bring up some type of denial, I reflect on the reality. I'm like, oh, so you think that, you know, every 50 years or so, all the scientists in the world get in a room and the topic every time is, here's the lie we're all going to agree on, right? I'm like, you know who nerds are. Why, you know, we all want to be chief, super smartest nerd ever. And if all I have to do is point out that, hey, everybody else is lying, you know, I'm the man instantly. So why wouldn't I do that? You know, not to mention that scientists are the biggest hater. Don't let Dwayne fool you guys who are watching him. He looks nice and he's smiling. Let one of his colleagues speak and see what happens. Your colleagues, if you tell your colleague that you measured, calculated, think, anything, they're going to attack it as they should, right? It's 5. How do you know it's 5 and not 5.001 or 4.998? You know, it gets to that level of being pedantic with each other. You know, the reality is we're all haters, and there is no conspiracy to lie. And then as a professor, I can address things in my classes directly. Like I'll say, you know, I'll ask, how many of you disbelieve in the Big Bang? How many of you believe in the Big Bang? How many of you disbelieve in evolution? How many of you believe in evolution? And then by the end of the class, they all realize that using the word believe wasn't even the right way to think about the question, right? So it all depends on who's doing the talking.
And how you talk. It is one of the great things about science is that it's self-correcting, is that if somebody is wrong, invariably there's someone else that's trying to duplicate their experiment. And if it can't be duplicated, then it raises the question. The skepticism that's built into scientific integrity is some of its greatest strength. And indeed,
that's a huge understatement, Phil, because the way it works is you do everything correctly and they tell you you did everything wrong.
Right.
And it's not until years later, right? And I've often seen this as well. Oh, they did it incorrectly, that other group. They're idiots. We did it correctly. Oh, yeah, we got the right answer, but they're idiots, and we did it correctly, and they didn't.
And by the way, we need a bigger grant in order to proceed with this experiment. We have a question from Libby Khan, and she is asking, I think this is going to be for Dr. DeFries, about the differences, the impacts of septic systems versus sewers here on the Space Coast. And it's actually true for what we've seen over in Tampa Bay, up in the Chesapeake Bay. I know a lot of science, a lot of studies have been looking at these various estuaries and the impact of human waste disposal. Doc, can you talk about septic versus sewer? And it's something else that I know that it's important is recycled, reclaimed water that we're using to sprinkle on our lawns, and its impact as well.
I'd be happy to, and I'll keep this short because it's kind of a simple story. When we look at wastewater management in the state of Florida, we just haven't gotten it. So a wastewater treatment plant, will move biosolids to land spreading with nitrogen and phosphorus levels that greatly exceed what we call advanced wastewater treatment standards. We'll take reclaimed water, allow it to be used. And it's really good in one respect because we're preserving and protecting our water resource, but we're not managing. We haven't really done a good job of managing the nutrient concentrations in that delivery system. And so, people ask me, so what's most important? And the answer is it really depends on where you are. And so if I'm in a community that has done everything they can to make their wastewater treatment plant AWT, if they're meeting the high standard, and they're managing nutrients in that waste stream, then it may be that the septic situation is driving more of the loads. But it's the 21st century. You saw the technology that we have to look at the globe. There is no excuse for any community, any state, not to be looking at what is 21st century wastewater, where we are not putting nutrients, dissolved organic pollutants, on land, which ultimately leads to water. I mean, the state of Florida, we have 300,000 septic tanks in the watershed. We know they contribute nitrogen and phosphorus. We know that many are old. Many have drain fields that are, if you're living on the lagoon, that may actually be underwater at high tides. One of the worries about sea level rise is they didn't get set 30 years ago at the right elevation. You can almost guarantee on high tides and king tides, they may be underwater. So first and foremost, you get the plumbing right, the wastewater. But that doesn't mean that you neglect what I would call the urban stormwater and large regional stormwater contribution. So for us in Brevard, if we look at Sebastian River, the land use pattern going all the way to 95 in a rainy season is contributing both surface water and groundwater that flows out of that river system from land and impacting the Indian River Lagoon, its salinity, its pH, its sediments. And that's why I said earlier, you don't want to just focus on one of these solutions because each community, we believe really strongly on home rule. These communities need to decide for themselves, what is best for the community. We can give them the best science, and maybe muck dredging scientifically is the biggest bang for the buck for nutrient reduction. But gosh, if they want a barbecue restaurant and the only way they're going to get it is by putting everybody on a centralized sewer system, there are other benefits to the community value of life that need to be considered. So, no question, nutrient diet from every source, you tackle it as hard as you can. But the septic system, think about 300,000 septic systems. On average, it's about $10,000 to convert. We're going to be at that process for a long time. And you can get some immediate changes from some other projects that can be done in a 1 to 3 year framework that will really reduce freshwater nutrient load. So the key is you got to do your homework, but all of those sources need to be remediated.
I tell you what, here on North Merritt Island, just half a mile from where I live, there's a wonderful sewage treatment plant that was built in 1965, and it is completely incapable of managing our needs when we have heavy rains, much less a tropical storm, much less a hurricane. we're not unique. All around the planet, human waste is a real deal. Animal waste is a deal too, but human waste is a real deal. One of the neat things that NASA has been doing is exactly, I think you both have hit on this, and that is some of the technology that's being used for recycling waste on the International Space Station, or for reducing waste, or managing it in composting, that sort of thing. This technology is now being used in Africa. They're NASA projects that, as a result of our space program, that are being used around the world. Indonesia, in Africa, places that desperately need, I think China too, probably. Chances are good China's hacked into whatever we've got running somewhere, and they're making it better than we are. But the truth is, this technology from the sky actually is benefiting humans here on the Earth. One of the things I'd love to ask both of you right now is that there's a plan for a huge infrastructure and sustainability budget. In other words, money is going to flow, hopefully, like we haven't seen in a long time, to help work on things like the Everglades. And I know that part of that budget also is involved in helping fund some Earth resources satellites that have been neglected over the past 4 years. Do either of you have any thoughts on where this money's going to go, where you would like to see it go? I know that the NEP is always looking for some way to get those 1,000 projects done here with the Indian River Lagoon. Would either one of you like to pick that up? Where would you like to see money go in, say, in Earth resources efforts, Dr. Aliosi?
Yeah, so I'm from the world of physics and astronomy. And two of our biggest funders are the National Science Foundation and NASA. There's also a lot of funding that comes from places like NOAA, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and others. And there has been a bit of tension between different piles of cash. So for the National Science Foundation, for example, they have some facilities. But then if you look at the economy of our scientific enterprise, where it exists in academia, professors are reliant on research grants to pay for the tuition and salaries of the graduate student and undergraduate researchers, as well as their own summer salaries. So as more facilities come online, some have to be decommissioned, and the rule is that the sites have to be made back to their natural state, right? So you have agencies making decisions where it's better to just keep an old facility around doing nothing because that's the cheaper thing to do. In NASA, you have space flight by humans versus robotic space flight. It's sort of the tension that exists quite frequently. So I would like to see the smaller investigator at the smaller school in a state like, a rural part of Florida or Mississippi, where I'm from. These individual investigator grants are the lifeblood of small communities and universities all around the nation. And I'd love to see money go into educating our population broadly.
I know CubeSats are changing a lot of that. The access to space that once was the regime of the big dollar spacecraft, the massive, literally there are school kids building CubeSats, 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, and they're being carried aloft on smaller launch vehicles or being carried up to the ISS and released remotely there, bringing research, real science, real good science, into the realm of rather average folks. That's exciting. Absolutely. That is genuinely exciting. Dr. DeFries, what do you think as this money starts to flow in for sustainability? Where would you like to see some of that, and what do you think the likelihood is that we're going to see it here on the Space Coast?
Well, I agree with the previous statements that Doc made. Congress has trouble connecting the dots sometimes, between kind of the academic research community, the kind of corporate industrial community, and especially in water, kind of the water infrastructure. So when you think about large infrastructure stimulus, the first thought, and it's happening in Congress right now, it's always about roads and bridges. And there's no question, there's probably $1 trillion need right there in just roads and bridges. But water, clean water is the lifeblood of a community, whether you're rural or you're New York City. And what I have often said and have put in documentation from the NEP is imagine, going back to when, JFK kind of made the pronouncement that, we're going to go to the moon, which was a bold aspirational statement, but he backed it up with, we're going to fund it and we're going to do it in this many years. We have not seen what I would call, and I was in industry for a while, kind of the back end delivery system. And I hear this, and I work a lot. I talk to Space Florida every month. I'm a total space nerd, but I see this intersection between clean water technology and space technology actually being very close. And I worry at times that we haven't invested at the right scale or with the right timing to drive either one of those ventures at the R&D stage. And I also agree, leveling the playing field, so small universities with young professors, that are innovative, taking some risks, you just don't see them getting NSF grants anymore. It's always the big dogs that have been at the table for a long time. So we need to rethink R&D. And I often use DARPA as a perfect example. So if you look at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program, which often has a budget in the tens of billions of dollars, innovation, has sprung out of that. Now, commercialization has been a challenge, like ARPA-E back in the day, struggled to take the technology, forward. But I think we have a model in space R&D that goes all the way back to the 60s. When we first sent the 7 Mercury astronauts into orbit, nobody said, well, we've already done this. Let's do shovel-ready turn dirt. We don't need to continue to push the cutting edge, the leading edge of science, research, and technology. And so we're going to need to change, I think. And I agree with Hakeem. It's not just the message, it's the messenger. And, water infrastructure, if you look at the needs across America and the globe for 21st century water infrastructure, it's a $1 trillion industry with massive potential for job creation. And if we did it right with technology, disruptive technology innovation, we could take that $5 billion cost we're looking at for Indian River Lagoon restoration, cut it in half, and instead of 20 to 30 years, do it in 10. If it's targeted, with clear outputs and outcomes. So, I agree that, we need to be constantly pushing on elected officials to see the connections between these R&D efforts and the social, economic, and environmental outcomes that they deliver.
I'll tell you what, we have the Florida Solar Energy Center right here in Brevard County that's right in our backyard. And the impact of solar power, of wind power, of hydropower, but right here, the developing and improving our ability to collect power from the sun. If we use distributed power generation, in other words, on a panel on every house, and use space technology, the gallium arsenide solar panels, high efficiency solar panels that have been developed for spacecraft, the prices are coming down and they're becoming now affordable for commercial use and soon for residential use. The quantum improvements in efficiency and the lower prices of solar panels really will have an impact. And on the individual homeowner, as they shut down the oil-fired power plant across the river from me, and we make the transition to more and more solar power, not just from FPL, but from individual homeowners, this really will improve the quality of our lives, no doubt. I see Bonnie has her hand up. Bonnie, what is your question?
Hi. Well, my question is, it seems like there's so much knowledge and so much technology already that you can work with. But if you looked at it from the point of view of children today who feel like they have no future, I mean, how can this really get moving and implemented, even what we do know? It just seems like a very desperate situation. And are we kind of, playing footsie with people? Would you please do this? Would you please do that? How do we make it happen on behalf of our children, our grandchildren, and future generations?
Who would like to take that?
Whoops.
I'll jump in. It starts with STEM education and making sure kids understand kind of the opportunities of innovation and technology, understand the basics of, the sciences and engineering. We spend a lot of time in the environmental community, in a sky is falling position. The messaging is often directed more to fundraising than solving problems, because when you scare people, they send a check. And so I think this is about vision. How do we have a vision for the future? How do we communicate it in a positive way, and then get everybody involved in it? This is where we want to go as a community, as a county, as a state. And I think it starts with kind of an aspirational vision. And that has been lacking, in my opinion, with a lot of these discussions. We're always looking at the problems, and we're doing, almost a micromanagement of problems, and not, doing the Buckminster Fuller thing where all of a sudden you're seeing what does Kennedy Space Center look like 70, 80, 100 years from now, with sea level rise and now, ocean launch platforms. Without vision, you're not going to get there. And I think we need to start, rethinking our future from a positive vision standpoint, and then communicate it to the kids. I got to tell you, at my age, I don't think there's anything innovative that's coming out of Dwayne DeFreeze in the remainder of my career. The odds are against it. I think the young professors, the young minds, the next generation, that's where the really innovation is going to come. And I hope I last long enough to see some of it. But us old dogs are, whatever we were going to do, we probably did 20 years ago.
With that attitude, come on, Dwayne, I'm just getting started, man.
I'm thinking about a business venture, but, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Hey, but I would like to say that I think you're absolutely right. We determine the future for our children. We paint that future for them. And if we have a positive forward perspective, then I think that we can give them that positive forward perspective. One of the things that I find really, time plays tricks. Like, for example, people will often say, families were so much together in the past. And I point out, no, in the past, you were a child and you were always with your family. So it appeared that way, right? But the thing that's relevant to the current moment is, what is your baseline, right? So my baseline, starting off in the woods of Mississippi in the 1970s, is a different baseline than a kid starting off in Melbourne, Florida in 2010, right? And, for someone, who comes to Melbourne, Florida, you're like, oh my God, there's so much wildlife. But if you take a person who lived there 100 years ago, they'd be like, where'd all the wildlife go? So, everything is relative, and, we are the architects of this future. So my 3-year-old just showed up, so I'm a mute.
Speaking of the youth, speaking out for all of us, well, I want to take a moment to say thanks to both of you. And I'm wondering if, I know, Hakeem, you had suggested that The one action item you were recommending was that somebody actually buy your book, because I'm hoping that many of us do. Do you have anything else very quickly that you might say, just please, before what would you like to see somebody that's coming away from this say? Hey, how can you change the world? How can you make it a better place from your perspective?
You know what? I think that we all work hard, all of us. It doesn't matter what you have to work hard in life. And I've been lucky in the sense that, I got some attention for my hard work. And the reason that attention occurred is because I started helping others. I had already been helping others, but it was really my service work that made people pay more attention to me. And when you read my story, what you'll see is that, so basically it's a story. I grew up in a crime family, nobody educated, nobody got a high school degree, but I became a physicist. All right. So, but
that's
point,
okay. We won't hold that against you. It's okay. Sometimes
nobody
go downhill from
environment could have helped me become a physicist. There were people who just happened to show up and were lucky. And I was lucky. And so we all have that ability to show up and help someone, or just be a kind voice to someone, or just be, I just think being positive, and if you do anything, you've done something. So it's really simple for me.
It's a one-on-one sort of thing, helping other people to make their way down the road, to get a little smarter and do the right thing. Dwayne, what would you like to end with? What's your final thought on an action item?
I think the key is focus on solutions, not just the problems. We are in at least my sense of the moment, a historic moment as a nation. We're coming out of this COVID, which clearly is a pivot point for industry, for supply chain, with an incredible story about how investment in private sector technology could deliver, multiple, vaccines, and then get them out. And we shouldn't lose the moment saying, if we have a similar, I'll call it attack on other problems, where the public sector, the private sector, and the independent sector are working together, solving problems. And industry needs to be at the table. It doesn't work if government does it alone. That, I think, we can move the bar in a way over the next, 4 years and beyond. That will be a profound transformation for our nation. And so I think the key is, forget about the hyperpartisan politics, which very often we see on the front end of the media. But for those of us that get the chance to walk the hallways of Congress, there's a lot of quiet bipartisan stuff going on, where you got a really good story, the right message and the right messenger. But, for the Space Coast, it's about space exploration, Earth observation, global leadership in technology with global partners is an incredibly important piece to this global environmental solution. Because I think many of our elected officials don't connect those dots. They don't see this tremendous overflow of technology and innovation that's been happening for 70 years since the Mercury astronauts, driving everything from us being able to do a Zoom meeting, and sitting on a cell phone all day. And so, I think right now the message needs to be, find elected officials, local, state, federal. They're doing the right thing, thank them, and then steer them, to the fact that strategic investments at the right scale is going to develop and generate a new economy for America, and especially in R&D, resurgence, from America, along with our global partners, because we never do this alone. You look at Israel, their water technology is amazing there. And so they're a major player. But I think the key is focus on the solutions, and then move on getting the solutions enacted. And Keep that positive vision and make sure we communicate it to the next generation. Let's keep these kids positive, motivated, and lifelong learning becomes just a pleasure.
It's a great thing to end on, and that is the idea that we must work together as if our lives depend on it. Because frankly, as we've seen from above, our lives do depend on it. This is the only planet we've got, and if we screw it up, there is no other alternative that we have. As we look ahead, our next event, and one of the things I'm going to ask everybody to do that's still with us tonight, and that is one of the action items I always like to mention, is that if you leave this event and just keep the information to yourself, well, we've lost. We've failed at our mission. Our goal is for everyone to share what you've seen tonight, to tell other people the stories that you've heard, the information that you've seen. Share it. It's very, very important, because otherwise we failed. And I encourage all of you to come back May 6th, the first Thursday of May. Our program is going to be called Free Speech. I'm right and you're wrong, and why that's such a stupid situation to be in. And so we ask all of you to come back May 6th for that program. Everybody hopefully will come off of mute, and let's give our guests, our panel, a round of applause. Dwayne, Hakeem, thank you so much for being here. We genuinely appreciate your being here tonight, your service to our community, your service to our planet. Thank you so much, everyone. I would like to remind our Action Projects Committee to stay on the Zoom meeting as we end it publicly. We're going to stay on it. And I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. Remember, take a look at that book if you're interested. Joaquin's story is really cool. And Dr. DeFries, you have to write your own book too, because your life story is pretty darn neat as well.
I'm going to sign off and buy that book.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Please be safe and be healthy. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.